Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I just absolutely love the members of this chapter. You always greet me so warmly. Even when I'm, you know, in my grubbies trying to shop in Publix or whatever, you'll come up and say hi and just ignore that I haven't shaved for a couple of days or whatever. So it's always a joy to come and share stories with you. And those great things that Arlen shared, I think you need to start thinking about maybe there should be a Disneyana Fan Club archive or library, you know, so Arlen's got some place to donate some of this stuff so that people can take a look at it. It's just absolutely amazing. And yes, the 10 shocking things he had, some of those shocked me, and some of those didn't. Those midgets, by the way, that's absolutely true, up on top of the marquee, they literally had to bring in the fire department with hook and ladder to get up there, and how they got them down, because they were all naked and squiggly and all of that, pillowcases. They stuffed them in pillowcases over their shoulder, carried them down the ladder. So that can be added to the shocking things there. And yes, there were 3 daycare centers in Florida where you know, Disney said, no, you can't put on those drawings. And it's not because Disney was a big meanie. Disney is a bully in a lot of things, but in this case, basically, copyright and trademark law says that you have to aggressively protect your intellectual property. If you don't, then anybody can use it. So if Disney had not filed suit against those places, what would have happened is anybody. Fantasy World could have drawn pictures of Disney, all of this, and if they were taken to court, they'd say, well, Disney didn't sue these guys and all that. Usually Disney works something out sort of off the books, where people then repaint that, and then Disney comes in and does that. But in the case of the 3 daycare centers here in Florida, what happened is Universal was still upset about Disney MGM Studios. So as soon as the daycare centers painted the walls, they had licensed the Hanna-Barbera characters. They went in and they painted Hanna-Barbera characters on the walls. Fred Flintstone and Yogi Bear, but with the copyright and trademark notice down there at the very bottom of the wall there. So some really great stuff there, Arlen. Thank you so much. And even though I love you as a chapter, I'm going to be unfaithful in June and July. In end of June, Dayton, Ohio, their Disneyana chapter board has invited me to come up and speak there at their event. So they're flying me up, they're putting me up, they're feeding me, they're driving me around. I'm never going to come back. But I will have to come back, because in July, the Detroit, Michigan chapter is having me up. And so their board of directors, they phoned like 3-4 months ago, is it possible that you could be available? And so they're flying me up middle of July, and where I'm going is right next to Detroit, is Redford, because they have an old movie palace, the Redford Theater. And what I will be doing on Friday night and for a Saturday matinee and Saturday evening is I will be talking for about 30-45 minutes before a screening of Mary Poppins, 40 feet high, and then afterwards I'll be doing questions and answers and selling some copies of books. I do that. I did that for Lou Mangello just recently at AMC for Oz, the Great and Powerful. So I went and did a half hour of shtick for that to happen. And by the way, I do have copies of both of my books here tonight. I made sure that the rain stopped before I brought them in. Of course, all of you have already bought all of those copies, so you don't need to buy them from me, unless you want to buy some for friends, for birthdays and anniversaries, and now it gets autographed by the author, which of course lowers the price when you sell it on eBay. But those will be here. And there is a reason that I'm talking about Splash Mountain and Song of the South tonight, and what suitable weather for Splash Mountain, right? Is not just because I'm here with the unhidden agenda of trying to sell my books, but because it ties in with a moment of Disney history. And as you know, I'm a Disney historian, and most historians, you know, are sort of obsessed with dates, right? So we know that, you know, December 5th, 1901, that's when Walt was born in Chicago. And that's sort of significant too, because that's the birth of a new century. And so while Walt was growing up, he had a taste of the previous century, and now the new that's coming. And Walt, of course, passed away December 15th, 1966, which again is significant because he's passing away before you're having the civil rights movement, you're having women's liberation, you're having Vietnam War, you're having drugs. How would Walt have dealt with some of that? I'm sure he would have. I'm sure he would have. But you know, that's sort of interesting, and you know, so dates have that. So and of course, you know, talking to you guys, I know you're all very deferential to me, and that's kind of cute. But I know that you guys have an awful lot of information too. You are the Disney expert. You are the Disney historian for your friends and family, and you often have, you know, those little bits that I just go, what? You know, what was that from? You know, so. That's always nice. But of course, if I tossed out the date, July 17th, you'd all say, and you'd all be partially right. December 17th, 1955, yes, that's the opening of Disneyland. But July 17th, 1989, was the opening of Splash Mountain in California. July 17th, 1992, was the opening of Splash Mountain here in Florida. Even though the official dedication was October 2nd, anybody who was working at the Magic Kingdom knows that July 17th, that's when Splash Mountain opened out here, and cast members and guests could go ride that for that little soft opening for 2 months to get that work. So now you've got that little extra bit of trivia where you can trip up some of your friends and neighbors. July 17th, opening of Splash Mountain out there at Disneyland, and also out here at Walt Disney World. But you know, the interesting thing about Splash Mountain too is it brings up something that I'm sure all of us have thought of. I mentor a lot of 20-somethings, and I have clothes that are older than them that I still try to wear. And a lot of them, oh, I just want to be an Imagineer. And it's like, well, being an Imagineer is not like just sitting in a room and thinking, oh, that's a cool idea, let's do that. You know, being an Imagineer also has the engineering aspects, you know, how are you going to create exits, what are you going to do, you know, for air conditioning. You know, when the Snow White ride opened at Disneyland, and Admiral Joe Fowler rode through it, and Walt said, well, what did you think? And he said, well, it's perfect if you want to call it Snow White Goes to Hell, because there was no air conditioning. You're in there, and the lights and all this, and it was hot, because nobody had thought about it, because nobody had built that kind of attraction before. So as an Imagineer, you have to think about more than that. You can't just sit around and go, oh, well, that's a cool idea. How come they just don't do that? You know, how come they just don't? Well, there has to be business reasons behind that. And so with Splash Mountain, once you see the business reasons, you suddenly see, oh my gosh, this was just such a natural transition. First off, in Disneyland in California, they had an area that opened in 1972 called Bear Country. And it was called Bear Country because, by golly, Country Bear Jamboree out here was just packed when it opened in '71. It was huge. And people in California didn't want to come to Florida. Why do you want to come to Florida? You know, we already have in California, we already have oranges, we already have heat, you know, we have all of these things. Why do we need, bring it over here? But the only place to put it there in California was on sort of a horseshoe bend. Those of you who have been to Disneyland know that, you know, there's Frontierland and there's New Orleans Square, you pass the Haunted Mansion, and then you go up into this little area. That was bear country, but now that's dead-ended. You know, that's the only way in, the only way out. And you know as well, when you're taking your friends and family around, you guys are those navigators, and you know all the little, well, if we just go this way through here, we can cut through here, and we'll get over here, and then we'll cut over here. Well, you couldn't do that with bear country. It was stuck. And so they moved the Davy Crockett canoes there, and the Mike Finn keel boats, and there was a restaurant, and people still didn't want to come there. On the busiest day at Disneyland, less than 2% of the guests were in bear country. So it was like, we've got to do something. We've got to have at least one other big major attraction to pull people over here, you know, because they just don't want to come. They just don't want, you know, if people don't want to do something, you can't stop them from not doing it. You know, they just don't want to do that. Now, the second thing that came up was Dick Nunis. Dick Nunis was Executive Vice President, comparable to what we would consider today the head of Disney Parks and Resorts. So he was the big guy, and he had opened Epcot when nobody thought Epcot, you know, would work, and he moved back to California to concentrate on Disneyland. And what he really wanted was a log flume ride. Because Six Flags Over Texas had the first log flume ride in 1963. And it was developed by Arrow Development, the same people who developed the Matterhorn bobsleds and all of this. But again, they're independent contractors, so they can sell to anybody. They sold to Six Flags Over Texas. Walter Knott at Knott's Berry Farm, just down the road from Disneyland, took a look at that and said, well, that's been tested now, that's been proven, let's build one over here. So Bud Hurlbut designed this outstanding log ride that nobody had ever seen before, because there were no chains pulling the logs, it was all just water. You know, if you needed to go up an incline, he actually had this rubber padding, so, you know, bouncing on the rollers, just through the force of the water, it was going straight up. And he themed it like California logging, and it was called the Calico Log Flume Ride. Today it's known as Timber Mountain, but originally it was Calico to theme in with the Calico Railroad that they had there. It opened in 1969, and the first person to ride it was John Wayne and his son. And when John Wayne comes off a ride and goes, "That's the best ride I ever ridden in my entire life, I'm going again," people want to go ride that log ride. John Wayne, my gosh, he would never lie to me. I've got to do that. And so the more that Dick Nunis talked to the Imagineers and said, we've got to have a log ride. All these other places have log rides. We've got to have one. The Imagineers would push back and go, that's exactly why Disneyland can't have one, because Disneyland is different. Did not go down well with Dick Nunis, if any of you know Dick Nunis. All right? Now the other thing, the third thing that led to this is what happened is there was an attraction in Tomorrowland called America Sings. The Carousel of Progress stage, all those figures had come out here to Walt Disney World, and in 1974 they opened up a new attraction using that same, you know, revolving audience around those stages called America Sings, where you had 100 or more audio animatronic figures. You had an eagle, Sam the Eagle, the voice of Burl Ives, and his pal, an owl. And what they did is they were taking you through the history of American music. Because in 1974, everybody was preparing for the bicentennial. So this was really going to feed into that. Oh my gosh, we're going to go here. Here's a great, you know, bicentennial attraction. We're going to see the entire history, you know, the way only Disney could do it. All these great animals singing all these songs and all this, and we'll go through, and it was popular. But 10 years later, not so much. People are starting to go, well, the bicentennial has been over for a while, you know, and yes, this is a cute attraction, but what are all these, you know, funky animals, you know, doing in Tomorrowland? This didn't seem to theme. And at that exact same time, that is when Disney was in talks with George Lucas. And Disney's intent was to give all of Tomorrowland to George Lucas. This was in 1986. And it was going to start with Captain EO and Star Tours, and then it was going to continue. And this carousel stage was going to be Plectou's Intergalactic Circus. And so the outside was going to be themed that a flying saucer carrying a space circus had crashed into the building. And so now you're walking up the ramp into the spaceship, and you're seeing these circus acts performing on each of the stages, on the revolving, as it goes around. And there was the ringmaster, P.T. Quantum, three-armed alien, audio animatronic, who was going to take you through all of this. And they were all, and Disney was all very excited about this. My gosh, George Lucas is going to take over this entire area, you know, and this is what we're going to do about it. But as a result, what do you do with audio animatronics when you don't use them? Well, you repurpose them. You know for a fact that out here at Walt Disney World, you know, President Jefferson is popping up and shooting bad guys in the Great Movie Ride as a sheriff, you know. So you do, William Taft, President William Taft, is a eunuch in Spaceship Earth. So, you know, you just play around with these things, right? Or you cannibalize the parts. But all of these characters are so nice, so wonderful, and you're going to tear them apart, rip them apart. What a horrible fate. What a horrible fate. Now, Tony Baxter, an Imagineer, and some people don't care for Tony. I'm a big Tony Baxter fan, but I know some people don't care for him. Had to drive on the Santa Ana Freeway, the I-5, you know, in order to get to work and all this. And as he drove, he'd pass the Anaheim Hills. In California, we really don't call them mountains because they're not mountains. They're hills. They're bigger than anything here in Florida, but they're sort of hills. So he's seeing that. And if any of you have ever driven in California and driven on I-5, literally there are days when it is a parking lot. And so as he is stuck on the I-5, and he's thinking about all of these problems, and he's also thinking, oh my gosh, I better connect myself to a project, because Imagineers not connected with projects find themselves somewhere else other than Disney. So I need to find a project, and he starts to think about this, and then he goes, wait a minute, we could do a log flume ride, you know, and something that would save money is, we'll use these audio animatronic figures from, you know, from America Sings. And, you know, they sort of remind me of Song of the South. He liked the movie Song of the South. Maybe we can adapt that. So literally, he went into work that morning, and he told Imagineer Bruce Gordon, you know, this great idea, as soon as he got in. And so they pulled the film, and they started to look at the film. They went to the resource library, they pulled the model sheets. It turns out that the designer of America Sings, the designer of all these characters, was Mark Davis, who also happened to have animated on Song of the South. And so basically all they would have to do is they would have to build figures of Brer Rabbit, Brer Bear, Brer Fox, but they've got 100 other free figures. And so what they did is they immediately pinned up on the office wall the list of all the characters they had. They put them in 3 categories: lazy, silly, I can't remember what the other one was right now, but that, and then they also had, you know, the scenes from Song of the South listed there, and how can we fit these in? They had a bunch of animated characters left over, so that's where the finale comes from. We have nowhere else in the story to put them, we'll put them here in the grand finale for all of this to work. So this went on very, very quickly. From the idea to coming up with 30 storyboards, which they did in 3 days, to a 1/20th scale model, took less than a month. Less than a month. And they thought, this is a done deal. We're in like Flynn. We know what we're doing. At Disney, nobody knows what they're doing. Other Imagineers were not supportive of this project. They were supportive of their own projects because it was, Tony came up with the idea in the summer of '83. Beginning of '84, what happens with the Disney company? Takeover. Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, so it's a whole new ball game. So early in '84, Michael Eisner is going to make his first tour of what was then called WED, we now know it as Imagineering, and the Imagineers were going to pitch their ideas. There were some Imagineers who didn't like Tony and Bruce for a variety of reasons. So Tony and the model were shoved in the back in a corner. And Marty Sklar was giving the tour, and he had no intention of going back there because he had all these other great ideas that he wanted to pitch. Eisner, however, brought along his 14-year-old son, Breck. So as Eisner comes in, and Wells was there as well, Sklar is taking them along and is promoting, his great projects, and then, he had some favorite Imagineers, and he was steering that. But Breck, this 14-year-old kid, wanders into the back corner where Tony is and starts playing with the model. Towards the end of the tour, Eisner goes back and takes a look. And Breck says, "Dad, this is just great. My friends would love this," and all that. And Eisner was looking for something to appeal to a teenaged crew. And also, when he found out that, oh my gosh, we've got 100 free audio animatronics we can put in, what great, we can get great value at minimal cost, he was ready to greenlight it. And Tony and Bruce and John D. Stone, who was the designer, had already come up with some names like Song of the South, Log Flume Ride, and Zippity Doo Dah, which, by the way, here's a bit of trivia for you, that is a term that was created by Walt Disney himself. It does not exist in any Joel Chandler Harris book. If you take a look at the notes that Walt made on the initial, which I've seen, in the big red grease pencil and the blue grease pencil, he had come up with that himself. He just loved those play of words for that. So it was going to be called the Zippity Doo Dah. It was going to be called the Zippity Doo River Run. And Eisner hated all of those names. He said, we're going to call this Splash. Because Eisner's favorite Disney live-action movie that had just come out was Splash. Not only were they going to call it Splash, Eisner says, is there a way we can put a mermaid in this? So they had to explain to him there are no mermaids in Atlanta, Georgia, in the works of Harris. Eisner loved Splash so much that he was literally going to have a nightclub at Pleasure Island called Madison's. It was going to be run by an old sea captain who had fallen in love with a mermaid and could never find her again. So some of the special effects that ended up over at the Adventurers Club was going to be in Madison's. Also, Eisner was the one who put into production Splash 2, which was the direct-to-TV movie sequel. And it was the very first feature film filmed at Disney MGM Studios. Eisner, a big Splash fan. Finally, Eisner took a look at it and he goes, it's a mountain, and at the end you splash. It's Splash Mountain. And you go, yes, Mr. Eisner. So even though the project was green-lit in 1984, construction didn't start until 1986 because things were backed up. Now, I know this is difficult because even when I talk, I become enthralled with my voice. But I brought video. Maybe not as good as Arlen's, but video that I'll bet some of this Arlen hasn't seen. So, to get us in, we'll see though. Maybe, Arlen is always full of surprises here. Let's take a look at the trailer for Song of the South so we get familiar with the characters here. There we go.
Yes, that zippity doo-dah movie. Song of the South.
Okay. This next segment is something that I don't think Arlen saw, because I grew up and lived out in Los Angeles, California. And in California, we have something at Christmas that you guys don't have out here. The Hollywood Lane Parade. That's what Gene Autry was singing about. Here comes Santa Claus, here comes Santa Claus, right down Santa Claus Lane. Hollywood Lane was then transformed into Santa Claus Lane for the parade that they had here. This is a segment from the 1988 Christmas Hollywood Lane Parade, publicizing Splash Mountain, that was to open in January, but it didn't open until July, because what happened is a lot of the contractors, this is what happens when you go with outside contractors, couldn't fulfill their guarantees, so this just went on. But here's a little segment of Disney, and this is the first promotion that Disney ever did for Splash Mountain, 1988, Christmas week in Hollywood. Here we go. Maybe. Or you could always run the trailer again. There we go. There's Prayer Funk. Okay.
Now, here's a glimpse of excitement and fun representing the newest and the most thrilling attraction Disneyland. It's called Splash Mountain. Now, she opened in February, and I'm told it's going to be the biggest thrill ever. It's based on Rare Rabbit, Rare Fox, and Rare Bear characters. You found out, of course, Rare Character. It's the wildest and wettest
Looks like little Africa.
And these are the Splash Mountain Masters we're watching. Can they say?
So you can see that Disney was taking a little Abner approach to it.
The splash. I didn't mean it.
Anyway, this is a sample of the holiday fun in Disneyland's very Merry Christmas parade. Now running through January 2nd.
That's why Chip and Dale are wearing those hats and those scarves. This was part of the very Merry Christmas parade that year as well. They didn't just build the float for the holiday parade.
Ice rink.
I see her.
Minnie Mouse.
Well, this looks so much better in my memory, but that's okay. You know, one of the great things about being a member of this chapter is that they bring in so many great guests to talk. And you know that 2 years ago we had David Stullery. And when we think of David, we always think of Spinnin' Marty. However, he was in a very special episode of the Disneyland TV show that has only been seen 3 times. The first time was in 1956. It was a tribute to Joel Chandler Harris, telling the story of the writer of Song of the South and having David Stullery play the young Joel Chandler Harris. And so the first time it appeared on TV was January 18th, 1956. And that was the first re-release of Song of the South. Now the funny story about that is in Song of the South they had a little actress by the name of Luana Patton in there who was there with Bobby Driscoll. Well, by 1956, she was in high school and doing well, and she was working part-time as a ticket taker at a movie theater in Long Beach. When it was robbed, and when they were playing Song of the South. And that incident convinced her to go back into